Good evening. My name is Elaine Bauman. I'm president of the River Falls branch of the AAUW, and I am very pleased to be here this evening sponsoring a program by Braver Angels of Minnesota. I have our two speakers here. On my far left, Ed Marek, and closer to me here, Bruce Morlan. Ed is a Chicago native and came to Minnesota to earn an MBA from the University of Minnesota. The majority of Ed's professional career was in nonprofit fundraising and management, most notably with the American Red Cross and the Minnesota Environmental Fund. During his time with the Red Cross, he served on numerous national disaster assignments traveling throughout Minnesota, as well as Louisiana and Missouri. Ed has been a member of 4 Rotary clubs: Shakopee, Eden Prairie, St. Paul Sunrise, and now Northfield. Ed served as District 5960 governor in 2020-2021. He serves in Braver Angels as an ambassador and as the Braver Network State Partner Representative from Minnesota. Ed is married to his best friend, Sue, and they have a son, Steve, and 4 years ago lost their daughter, Amanda, to breast cancer. In his spare time, he enjoys cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, canoeing, kayaking, camping, hiking, and reading. And his partner tonight is Bruce Morlan. Bruce is a native Minnesotan, having been born and raised in the southern farm country near Rochester. He left Minnesota to become a career Air Force officer, serving as a launch officer and moving on to become a military mathematician. First as a staff officer and then as an instructor, his career focused around being an analyst and a translator. In his second career, Bruce conducted clinical trials as a statistician and did data mining for the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. Bruce joined Rotary late in life in 2015. He has been an ambassador without portfolio for Braver Angels since it was first formed and attended the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Braver Angels Convention in 2019, 2023, and 2024 as a Red. He is part of the Red Caucus in Braver Angels. Bruce has 6 grandchildren who give him the motivation to continue the work to make the world a better place with both climate change and our political divisiveness as 2 immediate concerns. To relax, Bruce reads, writes, sails, and bikes. He is also vocal in several coffee groups that bridge the political divide. So at this point, I'm going to turn our program over to Ed and Bruce. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Elaine, and thank you to the AAUW for having us and to the River Falls Library for hosting us. This is wonderful. And welcome to the basic presentation about Braver Angels called Becoming Braver Angels, Depolarizing the United States. Before we present on Braver Angels, I want to explain why we feel this is important. Bruce and I are both Rotarians, as Elaine has told you, and Rotary is an organization that's committed to building a more peaceful world. We do this through our projects that are done globally as well as locally. Our focus areas for our grants are disease prevention and treatment, water and sanitation, maternal and child health, basic education and literacy, economic and community development, and the environment, which all feed into supporting the last one, which was peace and conflict resolution. In Rotary, we ascribe to a personal moral compass called the 4-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? The polarization in our country that we're facing is not going to be resolved with this next election, no matter which candidate wins. But Braver Angels is a path that can help eliminate this division and help to reweave the social fabric in our nation. We can all make a difference here in our own backyards. Bruce?
Okay, by way of introduction, you already heard that I was an Air Force officer. One of my personal stories about why I work with Braver Angels has to do with an oath that I took to defend the Constitution. As an Air Force officer, I took the oath twice, once to come into the Air Force and once to convert to a regular officer from a reservist. And that oath swore me to uphold the Constitution and defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And nothing has released me from that oath. And now, as I'm retired twice, I'm finding that I can no longer serve that oath from within either political party. I have to serve it from the middle. And frankly, Braver Angels is my middle. And it's where I serve that oath from. And thank you for having us here to talk about Braver Angels. So, I do not like that man. I must get to know him. As a quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln, and I'm sure we've been all hearing a lot more about Abraham Lincoln in recent months or years because of the similarities we see in the history past that we're traveling. So these are hazardous and dangerous times. And part of what Lincoln provided for us was a model of what we might want to do. And we might remember from our high school history class that he formed his cabinet using people from both parties. Now, it was a pretty divisive time back then, and that took real courage. He was a braver angel before there was such a thing. Our name comes from his inaugural address, and I think we'll talk about that again a little bit more. But what I do now is I want to talk about some of the things that drive all of this. In particular, I want to talk about the cost of polarization. And polarization, I'm going to tell you in a simple example, is we might be polarized in some sense, in that some of us like the Packers and some of us like the Vikings. And
Be careful.
I know. This is my first time using this story in the neighboring. But at the end of the day, you know, we may be different on that opinion, but we're together still. We're still going to watch the football games. So we're in some sense united in that cause. But there's a different kind of polarization going on right now. That's affective polarization. And what is affective polarization? Well, it's the kind of polarization that you get when you are first a member of a group and then a member of society. So when you are so strongly divided that you take all your readings from the group that you belong to and start using some of the language we hear, then you become affectively polarized, emotionally polarized in a way that makes it really hard for you to not be a polarizing factor. One thing that polarization lets us do is it lets us talk up our own side, right? So we're the greatest, we're the saviors, we're the ones that are going to bring everything back together again. And at the same time, we're able to talk down the other side. And we do so in very damaging ways. You do so using the language of the military, combative language, or of the religion, very, very moralistic language. We tend to call the others evil. We say they have evil intent. They say they're out to do terrible things, and we attribute terrible things to the other side. And if you've ever watched old war movies, you know that's what the sergeant does just before he sends the guys out of the trenches to attack the other guys on the field. He talks down how bad they are and how good we are. And when you use those techniques, you really end up polarizing way beyond what you would do at a football game. That's much more sincere and much tougher to get past. One thing that does is it means that when we're trying to talk to the other side, we don't listen. All we do is talk. We present. We pontificate. If you've ever taken a course on communication, you'll be reminded that one of the first things you learn is you can't start formulating your answer, your rebuttal, while the other person is still presenting their story. You have to really listen. And we don't do that when we can say that the other side are evil. I have been lobbying now in Washington with Citizens Climate Lobby as a member of the caucus, the conservative caucus. I happen to be a Republican. And so they send me to Washington, and I go into the offices there, and I have to report back that I've been in Democratic offices, and I've been in Republican offices. None of them have tails. None of them have horns. They don't have cloven hooves. They're just people like you and I, trying to make the world a better place. And our political parties Can't stand that. I have here my visual aid. It's a pair of glasses. And if you look, you can see that one lens is red and one is blue. Our political parties want us to look through the world with just one eye open, the one that they prefer, so that they can keep us from learning anything about the other side. All the communications they get are designed for one pair of glasses. And if you go through life closing one eye, you don't see the whole story. And I like to tell everybody that braver angels will help you take off those glasses. And I hope that you'll have lots of questions when we get to that part of the talk. So, in any case, so what's the good news? Well, there is good news. We have a lot more in common than we think. And if we just get out of our affective polarizing echo chambers and talk to each other as people, we can learn that we have some things in common. We'll still have some things that we're not in common, that we're not able to, see eye to eye on, but at least we'll be able to see past the filters. And I talk sometimes about an industry called the conflict entrepreneurs, and these are the people who run the political parties now. And their job is not to solve problems. Their job is to amplify problems and create divisions. Because then, how many of you here have ever gotten one of those emails that says, did you see what those guys are doing over there? If you just send us 10 or 20 bucks, we can solve this problem, right? We all get those emails all the time. Well, there's no money made in finding solutions. There's only money made in division. So, sorry. So at this point, I'm going to let Braver Angels, I'm going to let Ed talk. He's a trained, remember it said I was without portfolio. I'm not as well trained as Ed is in this stuff. I just am passionate.
So the mission of Braver Angels is right here, brings Americans together to bridge the partisan divide. And in Braver Angels, we have a pledge that includes the phrase, as individuals, we try to understand the other side's point of view, even if we don't agree with it. That's difficult. And we find that it's really important to listen and try to understand the other side's point of view. Another part of our pledge says, in our communities, we engage those we disagree with, looking for common grounds and ways to work together. This too is a challenge. But as an organization, we look to have those conversations that may or may not lead to common ground. Our rule says to have red and blue leaders at every level of the organization. Having said this, I have to admit that our organization currently has more blues than reds, and we're actively seeking more red participation, more reds to come on board with us. So Bruce is a very rare commodity, and I take very good care of him because we need to have both sides in here together. And actually, how we got paired up is I had gone out down to his club at the time, which is now my club, Northfield, to talk about a program, an initiative that we were doing in Nicaragua. And he said, hey, Ed, I'm going to be giving a presentation on Braver Angels to our Le Sueur, Minnesota club. I said, great, let me know when you're going to go down there. I'll come down and cheer you on from the peanut gallery, right? And 2 weeks later, I'm CC'd on an email going into Braver Angels in Minnesota asking for the slide deck for Rotary clubs because Ed Marek and I are going to give a presentation together. I said, time out, Bruce. I never agreed to that. He said, hey, a red and blue together. I said, all right, you got me. And this was in 2019, and we're still together here doing these things. So it just kind of goes on and on. Braver Angels seeks to reflect America in regarding race, ethnicity, social and economic class. Our constant striving is to be an organization that reflects the country we seek to serve. Our work at Braver Angels is to build a house united. And I know what I've been talking about so far may seem we're just an organization of reds and blues. We welcome people of all political stripes. We have members who are registered as independents, as well as others, which some may call purple, a mix of red and blue. Others and independents can take part in almost all of our events and welcome their participation in helping to build this house united. And I have to tell you, it's everyone needs to get on board with this effort in order to make it work. This is where we really need to all come together to start to change the direction that we're in. So how did we begin? Well, in 2016, you might remember there was an election, and it got a little contentious. And there was a David in Manhattan who was part of a think tank who worked with a David who lived in Ohio, was also part of that think tank. And they wondered if Hillary supporters and Trump supporters could come together and have a civil conversation. And it turns out, with a little help from Minnesota in the way of Bill Doherty, who is a professor in family counseling at the University of Minnesota, they could. He put together a program. He had 10 days to put this together. And they spent Friday night, Saturday, Sunday together. And at the end of it, it was just such a success that they were asked to go off and do this in other communities as it heard. And that's how we kind of got rolling with this. The gentleman on as you're looking at, so on your right, as you're looking up there, in the white shirt on the very end, is a evangelical Christian conservative, and the man in back holding up the peace sign in black is a liberal Muslim. The two of them were paired together for that workshop, and at the end of the workshop, and to this day, they go to mosque together now. They go to church together. They're the best of friends. They're at each other's house for holidays and parties and whatnot. At the last convention, I had the opportunity to meet the Greg Smith in the white shirt, the conservative, and he is just the salt of the earth, one of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet. And it was just a delight. And you hear those terms, evangelical Christian conservative, and your hackles will go up, or you hear liberal Muslim and your hackles go up. But as Bruce said, we're all just people, and we have more in common than we have, causing differences. And once you get to know somebody, it really tones things down. We got started. Where am I? Here we are. I got started. Well, this is kind of our timeline. It was the first Red Blue workshop, and then it started to grow. As I mentioned, they got a bus. They started going on a tour out to the west or east coast, and it got more formalized and a lot of growth in 2020. And it's been kind of growing ever since. We got involved with it. I got involved with it personally back in 2018 when we had Bill Doherty. My former Rotary Club was St. Paul Sunrise, and they used to do a community forum each year. And looking at an issue of urgent concern in the community, they would bring in the experts for it and have a kind of a panel discussion and find ways to address the issue. And in 2018, we invited Bill Doherty to come in. And he got up on the podium and he was telling us about Braver Angels and what it was about. And we had a banner up on stage, which was a four-way test, which I had recited earlier. Is it fair to all, is it the truth? Is it fair, et cetera, et cetera? And he must have pointed to it 4 or 5 times while he was up there on the podium saying, Rotary, this is in your DNA. Well, there was a gentleman there that got all excited about it. He stood up and he said, my gosh, our district needs to get involved with this. This is important. And I'm sitting at the right table, because he happened to be sitting at the same table as our current district governor at the time. And so he went over to Kyle and said, we need to be doing this. And that's how we kind of got started with this. And then Bruce and I met up and, off we went. We've been traveling around to Rotary clubs and other organizations presenting on Braver Angels and the importance of it. In 2020, there was another initiative that Braver Angels started, which was with Malice Toward None, another effort to try and bring the country together after that election. And the first testimonial on the Braver Angels website for it said, as civic leaders, we need to be involved with this. This is important. And that first testimonial was signed John Huco, General Secretary and CEO of Rotary International, Braver Angels member, which really impressed me, that the head of the entire Rotary organization, which is international, we're in 100 and I don't know how many countries, it keeps changing, but I mean, it's worldwide, let me put it that way. That really caught my attention. So that's, kind of how we got involved with it. Rotary has program offerings in 3 different categories. Grow Bravely, which is more training and discussion workshops that help build mutual understanding, kind of giving us the skills and learning respect for our commonalities as well as our differences. They're conducted either online or in person. They're free of charge. So, feel free to get involved and get some of those skills. And I have to say that some of them, we were talking a little earlier with someone here, who was, saying she was having difficulty talking with a relative, and Thanksgiving's coming up, which is always kind of an interesting time around the family turkey. And some of these skills are very helpful navigating through Thanksgiving. So you might want to keep that in mind as well. So that's grow bravely. Pair up bravely, where we set you up with one-on-one conversations. So if you're a blue, you can get set up with a red and have a conversation. It's kind of guided, and you come out of it, with a new friend, basically. Bruce did this with one gentleman. They're still playing chess to this day, right? Getting together and doing that. But it brings across differences, not only politically, like red and blue, but urban versus rural, multi-ethnic, multi-generational. It helps bring across any kind of a divide. And then experience bravely, a wide variety of experiences that deepen connection and understanding between members. This concludes debates, which are also online. You can listen along, and they're just fascinating to hear other people's points of view on issues of the day. Book and movie discussions, as well as a lot of media content. Well, we've been telling you about all that stuff, but let's talk about the results. And we find that we do indeed reduce affective polarization that Bruce was describing earlier. We're finding that these events help people on both sides of the red-blue divide decrease their stereotypical thinking about the other side, and it leads to seeing others as individuals and not faceless people who are, for some reason, standing in the way of getting good things done. In general, 70 to 80% of our participants in our workshop report better understanding and a change in their perceptions, which may lead to a change in attitudes and actions. And here's something important. Our goal is not to try to make people change their views. That's not going to happen unless you've got some trust already built up. But what does happen is that they say that they do consistently change their views of each other. So we're still a Viking, fan, or a Green Bay fan. We're still that, but we're not, hating each other over it. So that's the important piece. And I think that's going to allow us to eventually find more collaborative solutions to our country's problems. Because when we truly turn down the rancor, we can become more willing to take a deeper dive to discover there might be something, some valuable information from a different perspective. Give you an example. Bruce and I had a discussion one day about heating costs. And, over in Minnesota, a very liberal state, people that are strapped financially, there's some support to kind of help with heating costs. And I thought, that's a great program. And Bruce said, well, there's another way to look at it. I said, what is that? He said, well, consider giving money to the landlord. The landlord then takes that money and puts it into the infrastructure of that building. So it puts in better windows for better insulation, increases the insulation in the house as well. Perhaps get a new furnace in there that's more energy efficient. And what does that do? Well, it keeps the heating costs down for that family. Right. And since it was a grant to the landlord, they didn't have to go out to get a loan, which will increase the rent because we got to get payback to pay, that loan. Plus, the third thing, which is probably the most important to Bruce, is that it keeps the carbon footprint smaller. It's a win-win-win. I thought, you got me. Here, this is coming from a conservative, and it's a great idea, right? But we can learn from each other is the point of it. And there's ways to do that. You want to add something?
Ed sells that better than I ever could. I was trying to sell that at the University of Minnesota one time, and I didn't get much attention, but he seems to know how to pitch it.
Talk to me later. I got a bridge I want to talk to you about. Where are we here? Oh, more collaborative. Great. So imagine what it would be like if we approached all our country's issues in that manner, where we could come together and really listen to each other and kind of get the other side point of view. The future, what's next with Braver Angels? Well, telling the American story, using a media initiative. We got podcasts, and I would encourage you to visit the Braver Angels website. And we've got some information out in the back there, and we didn't have a lot of information, so there's QR codes too that you can download later and read up on it. But just even going to braverangels.org and sign up for the podcast Braver Way. Braver Way?
Monica
Guzman, who's actually in Minnesota tonight, I think.
Yes.
Up in Superior, Wisconsin, giving a lecture. She's just fabulous. She's a journalist out in Washington State and does this wonderful podcast. Check it out. They're delightful. We have forums, we have op-eds, other publications, videos, online debates. We talked about public speaking, a lot of print and broadcast media, work. The work we're doing with Minnesota Public Radio with their Talking Sense program right now is collaboration between Braver Angels and Minnesota Public Radio. Scaling at the grassroots, fostering local alliance development through a leadership academy and a well-defined alliance journey. And this is something that Bruce and I have been going around to our Rotary clubs in our district, asking them to get involved and be the conveners in their community to bring in Braver Angels to host some of those workshops and inviting in everyone from the community, your school boards, your Chamber of Commerce, your city council, faith organizations, other service organizations, Kiwanis, Lions, whoever they happen to be, bringing all those movers and shakers together to go through this training together to learn how to talk to each other, and then moving on in that alliance journey to the Common Ground workshop, where you take one issue that the community is facing, and now that you can talk to each other without getting all upset, start dealing with that issue and finding solutions to deal with that. So that's something our little mission is, to try and get clubs to get involved with that alliance journey. And there's information up here you can take a look at a little later. Modeling strategic partnerships, seeking partnerships with strategically important organizations interested in depolarization to strengthen, the grass tops. Influencing our institutions, building relationships on college campuses, and even within the U.S. Congress through custom programs designed in each venue. And of course, we have our national conventions. We've had 4 of them. Bruce has attended 3 of them. I attended the first one here last June for the first time. It was here in Wisconsin, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And in order for a blue to go, because it's, like we said, it's evenly matched, you have to have a red and a blue together. And at the convention, we need to have that evenly matched up, because we're taking action and voting on the direction of the organization as a collective group. So Bruce has been paired up with a blue in Citizens Climate Lobby for a lot of years, for those 3 years that he's attended. And so I needed to find a red. So I called Bruce and I said, he had recently gotten married in December. And I said, well, could Kathy be my date? And he said, you'll have to ask Kathy. Unfortunately, she said, okay, Ed, let's go. So it was great. And it was just a wonderful convention. We had 750 people there as part of it, reds and blues and some independents, all matched up. We had the largest red-blue debate watch party in the country, which was 500 of us that evening all together watching this thing. And that debate was so amazing. And there was a red that stood up the next morning and said, well, last night America lost. And I think everyone applauded and agreed it was just a debacle. It was just terrible. Next one, Braver Politics. I want to take a moment to talk about that. Did you want to?
I just want to throw in something about the convention. I'm wearing my red lanyard. My wife has a red lanyard in my briefcase. Ed's got his blue lanyard on. There were a lot of red and blue, and the good news for us was we knew it was a balanced audience, because they very carefully made sure there were equal numbers. Because if you get unequal numbers, you know how it becomes very oppressive to be in the minority. Your voice isn't heard as much. But what's also interesting is to understand that some of the reds were very much pro-Trump, and were quite polite about it, because they were at Braver Angel Convention. They were going to be polite with each other. And I'm sure it was a bit of a shock to some of the blues to talk to people from the other side that were that far from the other side. And I know that there were people on the blue side that I would never have gotten a chance to talk to, except for the careful balancing. So that ability to do that is a key part of what Braver Angels is doing. So anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly all right. Braver Politics. This is an initiative designed to bring the Braver Angels message to officials and their staffs across the country, locally, at the state level, and the federal level, to give them the skills and and have them make the commitment to work together productively across the partisan divide. The end goal, here we go, is is an America where citizens trust elected officials, voters in both parties trust elections, and our political institutions reflect the spirit of citizenship and common purpose. The photo you're seeing there is Representative Dean Phillips from the 3rd District in Minnesota, and Representative Dusty Johnson, a South Dakota Republican, who are two of our most prominent supporters of braver politics. You want to talk about Dean?
Oh, sure. I was telling somebody before the meeting tonight, Dean Phillips and I shared a stage where he was the blue, spent about 6 minutes explaining why he was working on climate change. Remember, I'm a red, I'm a conservative, but I also work on climate change. At the time, I was chairing the Conservative Caucus, and I got to explain why I, as a red conservative, was standing up to talk about climate change. And it was really powerful to have both of us able to do that in the absence of those conflict entrepreneurs. And we had a mixed audience that was also balanced. Braver Angels made sure that the audience was balanced so that we could do breakout rooms and talk about the issue. It was really a pretty interesting time. I'd love to do it again.
And why don't you share on the...
There we go. All right, my turn again. What I want to do briefly is describe some of the offerings that Braver Angels does. And I actually stepped down from the chair of the Conservative Caucus and Citizens Climate Lobby to found the Braver Angels Action Team. And the first thing we did was we did some of these workshops. And so I'm going to talk about each of the workshops and kind of explain why we thought they were important. The first one was depolarizing within. Remember, I talked about an echo chamber effect? If the whole room is filled with blues, it becomes an echo chamber. And one of the things echo chambers do is they talk themselves up a lot, and they compete to who can prove that they belong in the room the most. The story I like to tell is I went to a bicyclist meeting in Minneapolis in the winter one time, January, and there were people there that were bragging about having ridden 10 miles, and I'm feeling pretty lousy, having had to drive 50 miles to get there, for crying out loud. But you know who won the prize for being the most bicyclist? He was a guy that had sent away to a Russian helicopter factory to get materials to make his own bicycle. He was the clear bicycle supreme for that meeting. Well, that's what our echo chambers require us to do. And so depolarizing within can help you fight back against that tendency. And in Citizens Climate Lobby, which is probably 90% blues, it's really important that they keep themselves civil and centered so that they don't chase away, because the reds are part of the solution. Everybody knows that. Nobody will admit it. But we worked on it. Oh, I should talk a little bit about the session. It's about 2.5-hour session, and it'll teach you a little bit about how to recognize polarizing talk, how to, you can't just jump up on a soapbox and yell at the person that's already jumped up on the soapbox. You have to be subtle, you have to be kind, and you have to be collaborative within your group. So we practice all of those skills. 2.5 hours. Skills for disagreeing better are the ones that you're going to need when you want to continue talking to your coffee shop friends after you've talked about an issue. And I have to tell you, I have lost personal friends because of their inability to be balanced, or my inability. It doesn't matter. One of us didn't have the ability back in the day. And so I lost them as friends. So this will help you do a better job. And it doesn't only help you talk and listen better, it actually will help you do a better job of presenting your side, because you'll learn how to not use, don't use the conflict entrepreneur examples, use your own examples, use your personal stories of why you feel the way you do about something. And that really makes for much more powerful discussions. So this is a workshop about 1.5 hours. Now, what's fun about politics sometimes is a debate. So we're going to get together a bunch of people and we're going to talk about an issue. We're going to talk about it in a parliamentary style debate. It takes about 90 minutes for one of these. You pick an issue that's got some divisiveness around it, but because of the format and the way the moderator and the chair control the discussion, you don't end up, this is not McLaughlin Group yelling over each other. This is much more like we think a debate should be. And it's not to try and change minds. We don't vote at the end to see who changed the most minds, but it's to understand better why they think differently than we do. Because once you understand that, you have a chance of learning from them just like they have a chance of learning from you. So that's kind of the icing on the cake, fun and games. And they do those by Zoom a lot because it's really hard to get people together across the country. So I do not like that man. I must get to know him better. I opened with that quote, and Braver Angels, in my opinion, is a place where you can practice what he was talking about. So, Ed?
Braver Angels came to the realization about a year ago or so that they can't do this alone. So they've created Braver Network. And this is where organizations and companies that want to be part of the solution are coming together and joining in this effort. And when Bruce and I first heard about it, we got real excited and thought, boy, we got to get our club, our Rotary Club, involved in this. And I thought, no, we need to do it a little bit higher level, at the district level. But I knew it was above my pay grade to just go ahead and make that decision. Rotary is very protective of their, like a lot of organizations, very protective of their brand. You know, they've worked very hard, and they change the logo a little bit. All of a sudden, they're rolling it out, and it's just yeah. Elaine's laughing. She's running. Rick, we run into this where you got the wrong logo. You got to redo this, and But I get it. You're rolling out a brand. It's international. We need to keep the uniformity going. So I reached out to John Huco, who is that general secretary and CEO of Rotary International, who is also a Braver Angels member. And I went to him and I said, I get it. We have a brand we need to protect. And anytime that Rotary enters into an alliance or a memorandum, a partnership, a memorandum of understanding has to be signed. Lawyers need to take about an hour, or a year, dotting I's and crossing T's and all that kind of good stuff. Plus, this is local. It's just in the United States. It's not international in scope. So I don't expect Rotary International to really get, involved with this. I said, but could a district do it? And he said, as long as it doesn't say Rotary International, you're good. So Rotary District 5960 was the first Rotary entity to join Braver Network. And that happened a little over a year ago. And two of us were very excited about it. And we've been getting our clubs online in our district and across other districts. We've worked with two other Rotary districts on the eastern side of the state with Braver Angels. We've done presentations to some of their clubs and gotten their district leadership involved with it, and as well as one in northeastern Illinois as well. And we now have another Rotary district out in Montana that has joined. So we're starting to get some momentum, going here. But that's Rotary, but there's other organizations that are joining us as well. And the whole vision of it is to create that civic renewal movement that I was talking about, where people are treated with dignity and no one is silenced. We strive for better conflict, an accurate understanding of differences, and common ground. And just as littering on roads is now unacceptable, although if you drive down some roads, you wouldn't believe that, perhaps not smoking in buildings, is more is current, very unacceptable. And so toxic political engagement must become unacceptable in everyday life as well. And that's really kind of the goal. So what kind of organizations are involved? They've got different leanings, conservative to liberal, to centrist, to off the beaten path. Some are nonpartisan. Many have goals that are completely separate from politics. Congregations, companies, civic groups, cafes, and colleges, just to name a few of them. Some are big and national in scope, and some are local and small. Some of them are focused on bridge building. A lot of organizations that want to, kind of connect the dots and bring people together, and others that are advocating on specific issues. There's one group, Numbers USA, is that the group? Yeah. It's a conservative-leaning group that is concerned about immigration, but they've joined it because they want to be able to learn to talk to liberals about the issues they see in immigration. And so joining Braver Network and getting the training in that, they're able to, get rid of the buzzwords that'll tick off liberals to have those kind of meaningful conversations. And that's the one thing that, brings us together is all those organizations, that they see America's being torn apart by this polarization. And we all believe that we can do better as Americans. We want our organization to be part of that solution. And we work together because no organization can change the country, but a movement can. And that's really what they're trying to accomplish by building this. So you can join us in the efforts, take some training, get involved, with a training, particularly, reaching across the divide. Or the other one is about an hour and a half, and it's called Disagreeing Better, Skills for Disagreeing Better. Very important around the Thanksgiving dinner table. So I'll just put that in there for you. You can check out the website. There's a QR code up there, or text 6686 and text BA, and you'll get on the mailing list. If you want to join, it's $12 a year for membership, and you'll be on the membership list for information about upcoming classes, some of the debates. A lot of it is, as Bruce mentioned, is online, and the website kind of talks about all of this. Want to thank you for your time and attention. We'll open it up to questions, but here are a couple of QR codes that I'll keep up here. We have the Braver Angels brochures there. We did limited amount. I try to get more, and they're out. But that QR code will give you the PDF you can download to your computer and print up. And the other one is the website to contact with the Wisconsin Braver Angels coordinators. So we're divided up by state, and I contacted the coordinators in Wisconsin to let them know we're crossing the border to talk Braver Angels. Just so you know, we're all on the same team. Go Pack, just to make it nice. And actually, we're going to have a Zoom conversation with them on Friday. So they want to find out a little bit more, because I said, our goal is to get more of our Rotary clubs involved in the effort. And we've got 10 of them here in Wisconsin. So they've said, we'd love to hear more about that. So we'll be having that conversation. But again, thank you for your time and attention. And we'll throw it open to questions. And if Elaine, you want to moderate that, it would be terrific.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce and Ed. That was a lot of great information. And if I can share one story, I was part of a training online back in 2020, I think, and there were quite a few more blues than there were reds online. So some of us had to switch perspectives, and I had to be pro-gun or anti-gun reform and the discussion, and that was it forced me to put on the hat, to think like someone who would be anti gun control. So it was a very interesting experience, and I really appreciated what you're doing. So at this point, we're going to turn it over to the audience if you have questions, and I'm going to just listen to the question and repeat it so that it's on the live stream here, because often questions will not be picked up by the live stream. Yes.
Concerned about climate change, but being on the red team, there's got to be issues that are at least perceived as being internal to one team or the other. And I guess I'll say, if you're conservative leaning but ardent about the need to address climate change, or liberal leaning but in favor of unlimited gun access, you've got some internal things. So it's not, there's not red issues and blue issues across the board. There's places where in each team you've got some pretty interesting divisions. And how do you deal with that within the Braver Angels concept?
Okay. So the question is dealing with some seemingly inherently internal differences in the red and the blue, and in this case, climate change. So would you like to respond to that?
I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that if those conflict entrepreneurs could figure out how to divide us over pie, one group would be apple pie and the other would be pumpkin pie, because they could divide us and make money. And so you say that something like climate change, the only reason you think it's inherently blue is because it's been marketed that way to you. And the voices on both sides are really strong, and the Reds have to fight back, not only against their own people, so to speak, but they have to fight to help I don't know what to call it, can explain to the blues in the room that want to work on that they are there to help because we have a shared solution. And that's the kind of the beauty of my organization, but that's different. Citizens Climate Lobby is started with a solution that's amenable to both. And when I, as a red, sell the solution, I run into one set of resistance. But when my blue friends sell that same solution in their team, they run into a different set of resistances. And it's all about marketing and things like that. And it's just always going to be that way until we, arise above the marketing. I'm a mathematician, and marketing uses math it has weaponized math in a way that really upsets me. So,
and I think it points out the fact too that we fall back to red, blue, or you're in the middle, but it's really a spectrum. You're somewhere on the spectrum. I mean, we're not all in the same place.
I'm a statistician, and I gave a talk on communicating with conservatives where I spent like an hour explaining how there were different dimensions to how we think. And then we were asked at the break to divide into left and right. And I said, no, I just got through explaining that that's not a good division. And they said, well, I didn't attend the seminar, left and right. But that's right. We see different issues through different lenses, right? So take the glasses off, listen to the other side, and realize that they have good reasons for thinking the way they do. And if you can listen to their heart, sometimes you can open our minds. That's what I like to say. We're not going to change your mind about something, but we'll open your hearts.
I used to attend a seminar up in Stillwater, Minnesota, years ago. It ran for about, 20 years or 21 years or something and it was in conjunction with the university here, River Falls. Kurt Leichte was the professor. And they would bring in Native American speakers. And it was just fascinating, and I could always tell the folks that were there from River Falls because they were just paying astute attention and scribbling down notes like crazy. Well, the rest of us were just leaning back and listening to the whole thing and going, this is great stuff. And it was a share of a lot of the wisdom and knowledge of a lot of the different nations within the country. And the one thing that really kind of came around with is the idea of the circle and how a lot of Native, nations really adhere to that idea that you need to understand the whole circle. So I'll hold up my hand, and the woman here I'm going to ask her what she sees, and she's going to say, well, there's 4 fingers and a thumb, and there's fingernails. I'm going, fingernails? What's she talking about? Because from my perspective, there aren't any fingernails, right? And for poor Bruce over here, 90 degrees off of it, he's going, fingers and a thumb? What are you guys talking about? Because all he's seeing is this. But until you get kind of the, omnidirection, you get it from all sides, and you really begin to understand the problem, you're not really dealing with the whole issue. So, and that kind of gets to that spectrum thing and learning to listen to each other.
Allison?
Appreciate your work. And Ed, I recognize your name. I had to look because Terry.
Okay.
Think of a lot of this work as being similar to parent-teacher conferences, right? The people who would probably benefit from going and talking with the teachers usually aren't the ones who are showing up for a variety of reasons and barriers that exist. And so I'm curious how we can get a broader network of people to engage in this work, because if you see a lot of the same people around the same tables, I'd like to see more voices being in this type of work.
Yeah.
Allison asked how we can get more people involved in bringing more people into the Braver Angels network or the Braver network, because often it's the same few people who show up for these sorts of events.
I wish I had a good answer. The answer I have is the one I used at the opening, which is I explained why I'm here. And I'm hoping that a couple of people will have that similar background and will say, oh, yeah, I did take that oath. Oh, yeah, I do belong to the Constitution first. to the nation first. And that's what you've got to find is you got to be braver. And we don't want to go out and knock doors and say, but we have to figure out something. A lot of what we do is letters to the editor type behavior, things that, would spread the message. When you go to an obvious echo chamber, if you've been to some of these workshops, you can share the experience and say, this is really, we're all of one faith here. I'll use the faith example, but it's really important that we work with those other guys. And those other guys might be of the same faith, but just a slightly different label, or they might be from a completely different faith structure. Learning to talk with them takes bravery. To go out and talk to people. And I don't know, I'm not suggesting you go to the church across the street from the one you usually go to and go charging into the congregation and say, hey, I want to share the word, and it's not going to work. But in the coffee shop, maybe you can talk a little bit about work that Braver Angels is doing. You can talk about, when somebody comes up and says, our politics is ruining our country, you can say, well, there are people working to help prevent that and get involved.
I'm reminded the 20/80 rule, 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. And I understand it's down to 10 and 90, so which is why we're always busier. Ridiculously so. And the other thought is Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, says it only takes about 20% or so of the population to accept an idea before it tips and we're into a new paradigm. And I understand he's just come out with a new book on it and kind of around the tipping point. And I didn't even read the blurb. I just saw the title, but it seemed to me it was kind of about talking about misinformation and other things. So I want to grab a hold of that book and read that. So I don't think we need necessarily to convert everybody, but if we get to that critical mass of that 20% and we get organizations coming on board, really promoting this and getting people trained and then talking to your neighbors and getting that training and feeling that confidence to go ahead and have those conversations it's not that difficult. It's the family counseling, model is basically what it is. So you listen, you acknowledge what you heard. So you got to really listen close, acknowledge what you heard, and then you kind of pivot and say, well, can I share my perspective? And you get permission to do that. And you're bringing, well, here's what I'm seeing, or here's what I'm reading from a different point of view, and start sharing that and discussing it. And it just kind of brings down the defenses so you can have communication. And that's where it's got to start. It's really about re-engaging relationships among people because we're just being torn apart.
Another small help would be every time your local politicians or state politicians or federal do something that bridges instead of dividing, send a letter to the editor, mention them by name, and say thank them for their bipartisan activity. Now, I'm going to warn you that when I was in Washington, we were warned not to thank members of Congress for being bipartisan, because if the word got out that they were being bipartisan, it could be a death knell in their own party. We have to fix our politics. And here's where I'm standing.
Yeah.
Carla?
Dishonesty and inaccuracy. So it's one thing to come to the table with an open mind of difference in opinion or perspective, but when the perceived or real dishonesty or inaccuracies come into the conversation, how do the Braver Angels activities and events, how do you address that in these conversations?
Okay, Carla asked about lies or inaccuracies that are brought into a conversation and not checked, and how do you deal with that in a Braver Angels conversation?
Yeah. I'm a mathematician and I'm also a statistician, and I love to, especially Ed, I have to remind the Rotarians that, is it the truth? Well, in my world, the truth is a p-value, a sample size, and a confidence interval. Try and get that on your 5 o'clock news, right? But with that framing, I'm much more open to understanding why people might have disinformation or misinformation. At the same time, those conflict entrepreneurs are milking the system by taking advantage of our gullibility. There's all kinds of psychological things that go into people who believe in conspiracy theories or who are members of a group that requires that they believe that, I'll pick a counter example of a group that believes that we can solve gun violence by just taking away all the guns. So if you're in that group, you're going to have conversations like that, and you're never going to understand any other perspective. And that is, when you look at the data, there's all kinds of data, and you can get into the data. I'm going to tell you one more data story. Sorry. The Marxist dialectic analytical method, which divides the world into A and B and then asks which is the winner, more or less, fails under Simpson's paradox miserably. And if you haven't heard of Simpson's paradox, it would be worth looking up a statistician and taking him out for coffee. I like coffee and chocolate. But my point is that the truth that you see is often going to be derived from the questions you ask. I used to tell the Mayo doctors this all the time. I'd say, I got 125 variables, you get to keep 17. Which ones do you want? I can explain your result with any 17. Try not to pick politically charged ones. That's the way a lot of statistics are, and that's going to be where misinformation and disinformation, which, by the way, are not the same thing. I happen to be leading an AI group in Braver Angels, and we're talking about this kind of stuff all the time. And the misinformation is when you've got the wrong number. Disinformation is when somebody deliberately gave you the wrong number. And those are two different things, two different motivations, but they lead to the same problem. So I don't think I'm answering your question at all, but I am rambling.
And I guess, with Braver Angels, the training we're giving you is to have that conversation, which, as I mentioned earlier, may or may not lead to common ground. And if they're so devoted to their disinformation, there's not going to be a whole lot what you can do, but offer your perspective and plant some seeds, and it's okay to the other thing is it is okay to disagree. I mean, Bruce and I do disagree on some things.
Oh, yeah. I like green kayaks. He likes yellow kayaks.
Okay. Yolanda?
This is AAUW is an educational organization. And as such, we try to tell students in general that it is important to ask questions, but it is more important to question answers. Now, so my question is, why does the organization call itself Braver Angels?
Oh, okay. So she made the comment that as teachers, we don't ask students to, question the answer, but, we teach students. Yes. Okay. So we ask students to ask questions, but then we give students the courage to question the answers, correct? Is that what you said? And so then the second part of the question was...
Why Braver Angels?
Yes, and why Braver Angels, yes.
We started out as Better Angels. So Better Angels came from President Lincoln's first inaugural address, saying, we'll, what's the phrase?
We must reduce the rancor by finding the better angels of our nature. So we were better angels for the first year or so.
And then it was discovered there was another nonprofit out there by the name of Better Angels who's taking umbrage at the fact we're calling ourselves Better Angels. And so we kind of rethought the whole thing and came out with Braver Angels, which we found you do have to be somewhat brave to be taking these steps and doing this kind of work. So,
and why the angels? Just because it was Lincoln's term?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Bonnie? Okay, come back.
are mostly listed in the Abrahamic religions. Only the three of Abrahamic religions talk about angels as spiritual beings that are good and bad. And I wonder why, parting from a religious you Abrahamic religions came about of a civil war. And nowadays they are the ones who are causing the world to be on fire. So using a religious terminology, I wonder if that's how can you unite people when religion is one of the things that keep history healthy. Or has religion and ethnic wars are where the longest and brightest.
That was a long one.
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and just address it?
I'm going to address it first. When I worked in cancer trials at the Mayo Clinic, we had people who thought it was inappropriate to use military language. We're going to defeat this cancer. We're going to beat this cancer. We're going to, they would use that kind. And there were people who walked around saying that's really not helping. And you have to ask what the framing is that people listen to it with. And I think Angel's the same way. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that it was just an accident that Lincoln used the term, and we never, it never occurred to anybody at the high end that it would be, off-putting to some people. Having said that, if we can appeal to your better photonics, I don't know, pick a different framing, it's still asking you to do the same thing. Whether you attribute, using the phrase angels, there's nothing magic about that. It's just a
in depolarization within American society, including through using their unique influence and networks to engage more in their fellow Americans in depolarizing from within the spiritual right. So they're still doing it, and why people of faith are the ones that are selected to do it.
I'm really going to go on a limb here and tell you that I'm an agnostic Republican at best, maybe a pagan at worst. And I don't care about the word angels one way or the other. I recognize that for a lot of people it doesn't trigger, but it does trigger sometimes. And I think I see your point.
And my background comes out of theater, and so angels are investors in the Broadway productions. So that's
Okay. Bonnie? Okay. Yolanda?
What we have, when
we'll take it back and
Mhm.
what's called tuning up, and consider that people go to a concert and they never pay attention to tuning up. And it's very important because the moment the tuning up starts, you hear cacophonic instruments, which towards the end, everything comes out as it is. And then you also carry out do not consider the affective responses and the persons who work with AI can accept the fact that emotion and affection is what it is.
Okay. Thank you, Yolanda. We're going to let you have an opportunity to visit with them afterward because we have other questions. Thank you. Bonnie?
I live it. Some part of me is absolutely terrified of our future as a country. At the national level, state level, my family level, because we're whipped. The other part of me lives in this place where I think, I'm so tired of all this. Everybody else must be this well. And I'm kind of wondering how you two, who are so engaged in this, respond to what I suspect I'm dealing with. Maybe other people have that thing going on. Like, and the weird part of me thinks it's all going to be okay. The terrified part makes me want to hide at home. So,
Okay. So Bonnie asked about the dual lives that many of us live in, that we're terrified of future or Pollyannic and going to believe it's all going to turn out fine. So where are you at?
Well,
Oh, just deciding who goes first.
Yeah. Well, I guess I see this as kind of a solution to kind of break through that. And yeah, it is tiring, the constant bickering and sides taking different viewpoints that are just, not making any sense at all. So this is a way to kind of, bridge through that, work through that. And maybe it's a solution. So it's something I keep working towards. I'm reminded a lot of Sisyphus going up the hill. I mean, but if we don't do it, what's the alternative?
Yeah. My part of my answer is that I have 4 horsemen of my personal apocalypse, and this is the 4th horseman, which is political division. The other 3 are nuclear war, global warming, and artificial intelligence, all of which are areas I've worked in on both sides. And but this is the one I work on the most, is political enmity, because I have to believe. Then the problem is, remember Ed said 10 and 90%. That's the old Pareto rule extended a little bit. There's a lot of people that drift through life and don't examine what's happening around them, and they count on the rest of us to do the right thing. And right now, there are a lot of people that aren't doing the right thing. So I can't stand and watch.
Okay. If you are willing to come forward, because there's been some really wonderful background in these questions, and I have difficulty synthesizing those to make, for this audience. So if you're willing to come up to the microphone and ask your question so it can be aired, please feel free to do so.
I think you've scared everybody.
Okay, yep. Come on up. Yeah, right. A little quiet, everyone. Okay, Allison.
I just wanted to revert back to Bonnie's point about being scared about what's going on. And if you think about it, we should be scared about what's going on with the polarization in our country. And what I like about what we're hearing tonight is that we can think globally about what the issue is, but this is really a tool to act locally, to act locally. And many of you know I'm running for office this year, and I've knocked on over 3,500 doors. And the skills you're talking about and listening to people and approaching every conversation at the door with curiosity and compassion, but also courage to speak truth and speak your truth and have those conversations with people one-on-one. I think that's how we start to bring it together and then demand it in our politics. So I don't really have a question, but I'm wondering, what do you guys think about the balance between that broader picture, the big picture, globally with politics? I mean, I think the source of the evil is money in our politics, and how much money is being poured in, and the divisiveness that's how people win the majority. They divide. They want to divide, and work the people against each other when you find that even the most difficult conversations, you have much more in common with people than you have differences. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that balance of the work you're doing is impacting at one certain level. What are other things we might do at another level with finance reform and politics, things like that?
I'm just going to real quick. We've mentioned Monica Guzman. Her parents are immigrants, I think, from Mexico. Voted for Trump, and of course, she's not a Trump voter. And she uses that as an example of how to bridge. And the word that she uses over and over is curiosity. So, thank you for mentioning that. Okay.
Yeah, and the thought of the money in politics is, I think, it's a conflict entrepreneurship that Bruce was mentioning. I was just hearing some statistics on a program I was listening to today. And of course, all the numbers, because I'm not a mathematician, are no longer in my head. But it wasn't that long ago that it was money going into politics was like $0.3 billion. It wasn't all that much. And now it was like 10 billion not that long ago. I mean, that's how much money is being poured into it. And a lot of my professional background was in nonprofits, specifically management and fundraising. And every election year, every 4 years, I used to hate it because I would see our donations drop down because everyone was sending their money into their favorite politicians, no offense, favorite politicians, so they could buy ads to tell lies about each other, and it's just, how is this helping us? Talk about the issues, talk about your policy stance. Don't do all the name calling that we see. And sometimes it's not even the politicians that are doing that. I mean, they're agreeing to be civil, but then you have PACs and stuff coming in and they're just, whipping stuff up, and they're unrelated to what the politician is trying to accomplish. There was, I got to mention Spencer Cox, he's still the Republican governor of Utah. When he was running in his primary, there were 4 of them running as Republicans for the candidacy for governor. And he said, well, I'm not going to be name calling or disparaging people and stuff. If that's what you want, you've got 3 candidates here you can, go with. Well, he ended up being the candidate. And then he, reached across the divide to his Democratic opponent. The 2 of them did a commercial together saying, he's an okay guy. He's all right. We just have a different approach to things. We're not, let's not do the name calling. He won the election and he went on to be the chair of the National Governors Conference and was really promoting the idea of disagreeing better. We can have our disagreements. That's okay. But this effective polarization stuff, we don't need to, bring that into it. So. But your point I think is well taken. There's just too much money in there. Speaking as a former professional fundraiser for nonprofits, so.
Could you have your discussion perhaps afterward or afterward, either that or go to the microphone?
Anybody else?
So, oh my gosh.
Too much translating.
So I get to get real specific. Okay. So I'm going to have Thanksgiving dinner with my brother. You've already heard a little of this. And my brother is going to really, let's do before Thanksgiving because after the election it might not matter. Let's do Halloween. Okay. And my brother's really upset with me because I don't understand that immigration is the most important issue in this country. What shall I say to him?
You can tell him that your conservative new friend from Braver Angels likes to remind everybody that there's going to be 1 to 3 billion people that have to move because of climate change. So we better figure out how we're going to handle immigration. As it happens, immigration is the key Braver Angels doesn't do issues, but they decided that for the next 2 years they're going to talk about immigration as one of the few policy issues they're going to talk about, because I think it's so important. So
I appreciate
now
you
what to
saying
tell
that.
now what to tell your brother, to say you can probably say, yeah, you're right. If we don't solve that problem, nothing else matters, because there
Which is
won't be
what
any
I
peace.
said. And my brother says, well, then you must vote for the person who's going to put an end to immigration. Now, I'm thanking you because I really like your ideas, but when you get down to people talking about things, everything gets so passionate. How do you turn the temperature down?
I think by asking the questions and just digging in, curiosity is the key. Is to ask, well, dig a little deeper. Why do you feel that way? And ask for the specifics. And just it really, when they feel heard, when people feel heard, their defenses come down, and it can really tone it down. The trick is you need to stay calm through it as well, which is the trick. Bruce mentioned immigration is the next issue that Braver Angels is taking on. The last one they did, and there's a QR code over there on the table that I would encourage you to take a snapshot of, because then you can download the report. Was on trusted elections. They did 26 of the common ground workshops, where they had equal numbers of reds and blues and probably some independents mixed in there as well, come together and discuss what could make, as a red, what would make you feel more comfortable with our elections? What do you need? Blues, what do you need to see happen? And they came together and they came up with, I think it's 23 points, as I'm remembering, of agreement on this. And some of them are really kind of surprising when you read them. And everything had to be agreed unanimously. If there was a disagreement, it was thrown out. But across the board, they came up with 23 proposals. And they've taken it, Bill Doherty took it to Secretary of State Simon over in Minnesota and shared it with him. And he thought, this is pretty interesting. Then Bill got invited to the state county election officials for Minnesota and presented it there. So we'll see if this stuff, it's just a proposal. It's just some ideas. We'll see if it, gains any ground. But I would encourage you to, take a snapshot. And if you don't do it there, go onto the Braver Angels website and look for trusted elections and download that report and read it. And that's the kind of work that Braver Angels is trying to do, is bring those differences together and find the common ground. What can we agree on to make it both sides, everyone is happy with it, and it goes back to a quaint time in our history where a thing called compromise was a nice thing, right?
Can I just add to that, Karen? So one strategy that I use that's been very effective is backing people up, using that curiosity, but back people up to the premise that you would both agree on. Could we both go, let's agree we want secure borders. Let's agree we need a way to bring people into our country legally and safely. Now let's talk about, what do you think would be the elements, what that would look like? What would great look like in that process, and build it from the grassroots up instead of arguing it from the top down.
That's a great point. She was saying is to bring it down to what you can both agree on. Well, what we, and this is something that Doherty did in one of the first trainings, is that both sides, want what's best for their family. Both sides want, whatever the issue, clean air, clean water, whatever the issue is. We all agree we want that. The question is how do we get there? What do we implement? What plans do we do? How do we approach it to make that happen? And that's where the disagreements are going to come in. Do you have a question? Yeah. Okay. Do you have an answer? Because I can come up with a question. Okay.
So I'm going to say somewhat facetiously that the problem is that Walter Cronkite is dead. But I think that it's not as much about our politicians is the sources of our information. And as information professionals, we really struggle with, like you as a mathematician, there are objective truths. And we have 24/7 news cycles that are profiting off of getting groups of people to follow. And I don't know how to fix that, but I would just encourage everybody who's listening, not just in this room, but who's listening to this, if you know you're primarily paying attention to a highly biased news source, try something different. Because they're feeding you for profit. Any comments on that?
Bruce said in one of our he first said it at one of our talks, and so I've stolen it and trying to get it in before he does from now on. Was that when we're of a certain age, and when we were young, there were only 3 sources of information at 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock. And the only difference between those 3 sources were the commercials. You're exactly right. Cronkite, Huntley, Brinkley, whomever you were listening to, you were getting the same information. It wasn't, and today it's 24/7 and it's not news, it's opinions and spin and just, off we go. So, and that I think is a real issue.
It's called clickbait type stuff. I used to tell people that we mathematicians figured out we could sell people Dodge versus Chevrolet with mathematics. And then somebody said, maybe we should sell politicians the same way. And that's the beginning of the end. Turns out that if you read a book called If/Then, you learn that the first analytical organizations were actually selling politicians using mathematics. And in a small coffee group with close friends, we can argue about whether democracy is failing because of math, because the math is destroying one of the foundations, which is that we can come to an agreement on something and then act on it. And right now, the math is not being used to do that. I happen to be a decision scientist. I got a whole bunch of cards. And decision science gives me some hope that we can maybe reconstruct the way we solve public policy decisions. But that's what it's going to take. Otherwise, money runs everything.
But that's a really important point.
Yeah. Sorry to be such a downer. Yes.
Self-righteous about our childhoods. The press of the late 1800s, early 1900s did the same thing. And as much as I love the pamphlets of the American Revolution, they were propaganda. Okay, and it's just that they're the propaganda we've come to accept. I don't think we live in that different a time. We just live in a different mechanism. So same arguments.
The difference in the mechanism is like the difference between a 500-pound TNT bomb and a 15-megaton nuclear weapon. And I tell people this. I first heard this when I was on the battlefield in Gettysburg at a Braver Angels convention, and it just blew me away when somebody said, well, the first American Revolution in 1776. And I thought, what? And as I looked into it some more, I said, yeah, you're right. That was a civil war between the Tories and the Loyalists, or whoever it was. The Democrats and Republicans, 1776 version. It's just, yeah, you're right. We can't get too self-righteous. But let me tell you, one of the differences in 1700s, a lie could spread as fast as a drunk on a horse. I used that in one of my op-eds once. I said, yeah, he'd go to the bar, he'd tell 5 or 10 people the lie, have a bunch of drinks, get on his horse, and ride to the next town. So his lie wasn't spreading very fast. Now, with the help of AI and social media, your lies can travel at the speed of light, and they go out to 20 million of your closest algorithmically identified friends immediately. And if you don't think that doesn't happen, I mean, come on over and watch some of this stuff that we have about what happened with AI and social media in third world countries where people were being killed because they were being targeted by the social media efforts. We have a problem with social media, which is why I could make the statement that democracy is in trouble, because everybody gets to vote. So it's in all of our best interest to make sure that everybody understands the importance of not being driven by our internal fears, but actually being driven by reason. Sorry. think that's all great.
Okay, well, we are at the end of our time here, and I want to once again thank our Braver Angels Network ambassadors with us today, Ed and Bruce, and thank our participation from our audience tonight. And if you are interested, again, reminding people, take the QR code information off of this screen, and we will do the same. And thank you all for joining us this evening.